Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar today, The Mysterious Kingdom of the Monarchs. And our presenter today is Whelan Phd, and he is broadcasting live today from our offices in Boulder, Colorado. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Court before I turn it over to him. His background in wildlife and conservation biology led him to pursue a joint PhD in ecotourism and entomology, while simultaneously coordinating and guiding small group wildlife expeditions and ecotourism adventures around the world. And from leading nature safaris to such far-flung places as Papua New Guinea and Madagascar to locales a little closer to home, such as Costa Rica, Belize, and Mexico, which we'll be talking about today, Court says his guiding experiences allow him to help people travel to and learn about extraordinary natural areas that make meaningful, lifelong impressions for everyone involved. And in addition to a passion for discovery, teaching, and adventure, Court is also an avid nature and wildlife photographer and is always eager to share his knowledge and creative guidance with his guests. And I would think this trip especially is filled with opportunities for great photos. So look forward to hearing more about that from you, Court. So let me turn it over to you now.
Great, Lee. Thank you so much for the introduction. That was really great. Yeah, well, welcome, folks. Thanks so much for attending the webinar today. As you could tell from the intro, this trip really suits my interest quite well. Having studied ecotourism and entomology in concert for a number of years, there's no more accurate way to hit the nail on the head than talking about the monarch butterfly migration as an ecotourism adventure. So thrilled to be here, thrilled to be talking about it, and feel very, very fortunate to be able to have guided this trip for many, many years now. Really just incredible. So today what we're going to be going through is a little, obviously about the trip, talking about what sort of things to expect, the highlights, so on and so forth. But one of the things I really think helps to understand a trip like this is learning about what we're seeing. What makes it so great, not just the lodges or the hikes, but what about the phenomenon in general? So I'm going to touch on that as well, kind of going back and forth throughout the presentation. And obviously at the end we'll have time for questions. I certainly welcome those, whether they be about the trip, the migration phenomenon in general, or gosh, really anything at all. So without further ado, I'll just jump right into it. For those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, this is me, so you can put a face to the name, standing just about 13,000 feet underneath Nevado Toluca, just a fantastic volcano located not too far away from Mexico City. In fact, on that gorgeous scenic drive from Mexico City to the little town of Angungueo, where this trip takes place, you'll pass by this volcano, and it's quite a look. You can see it from quite a ways off, very, very prominent in the landscape, and essentially has snow all year round, topping out at about 15,000 feet. One of the things I love about this trip and the phenomenon in general is that you don't have to be an ardent butterfly enthusiast, a lepidopterist, or even really an extreme naturalist to appreciate what's going on here. It's so multidimensional, much more than you might perceive at initial impression. It's not just a bunch of butterflies in a cluster or on the ground or sipping nectar. It has so many facets. The trip itself obviously is multidimensional in the way we integrate interactions with cultures and hikes and horseback rides and really neat local art and things like that. But the phenomenon in general, on any given day, you can see it in so many different shapes and forms. Here, we're witnessing this massive clustering effect. We're probably looking at about, oh gosh, 5–10 million butterflies just in one field of view. We're also seeing them soar through the air, not just clustered in the trees in their sort of hibernation state, but flying, just this beautiful, beautiful scene where at times they might even blot out the sun and how dense they truly are. It's one of the only places I've ever actually heard butterflies. The fact that you can hear butterflies, there's so many around you, is it's enough to really stop your heart for a second. Many people that I bring on these trips, it's quite emotional. You get to these colonies and it's just such a surreal feeling, surreal view to see so many butterflies in unison, all just so beautiful. And of course, throughout the trip, we're seeing them, like I said, in so many different shapes and forms, whether they're on the trees, This is sort of the pièce de résistance, so to speak, when that midday sun peeks out behind the clouds, and maybe for just a couple minutes, maybe for an hour, you could see these butterflies flying in mass numbers. Obviously, you never know exactly what you're going to get down there, but one thing I can guarantee you is that no matter what they're doing, it's just a truly remarkable experience. So, let's just step back real quick and kind of talk a little bit about the migration event in general, so you know sort of what you're getting yourself into. We're obviously, dealing with a holometabolous insect, meaning that it has 4 different life stages: egg, larva, which is the caterpillar, that pupal stage, or chrysalis as some people call it, and the adult stage. So when we're in Mexico, we're seeing primarily the adult stage. We're not seeing them deposit eggs, or they're not munching on plants as caterpillars or pupating. It's solely the adult stage. And what they're doing basically is every monarch butterfly east of the Rocky Mountains, that means from Kansas to Ohio to New York to southern Canada, and maybe even sometimes Florida, make their way all the way southwest to this small little area just west of Mexico City by about 100 miles the way the crow flies. And they do this each winter, departing sometime around the end of August or beginning of September, and then taking a couple months to make their way down on this more or less 3,000-mile journey. It's absolutely incredible. Their navigation techniques, the way that they find these places, still an area of very active research. It's quite rare in today's day and age to have an event so large, so significant, so seemingly well known, yet we're finding every year that we know a little bit less about it. As soon as we discover one thing, we're finding new questions that need to be answered. But at the same time, the fact that we're devoting so much great research to this, we're not just learning more and more about how animal navigation takes place, we're learning a lot about how conservation can take place between 3 different countries: Canada, United States, and Mexico. So it's not only great for the natural view and the science behind it, but it's great for understanding policy between North American countries. It's quite neat. So why are they going down to Mexico? Well, they're actually a tropical butterfly to begin with. They've evolved in the tropics. So they're used to hot, humid conditions of rainforests and tropical deciduous forests. What they're not used to is this white stuff that tends to accumulate in North America and Canada each year. This snow, these icy conditions. They can't really stand being soaked and wet with cold rain, cold snow, wind, ice, hail battering down upon them. So they need to get out of it. So what they do is, again, when that season shifts, they start to perceive things like host plants starting to become a little bit more worn. The sun appears a little bit lower on the horizon. They start to pick up on some daylight shifts. They begin this massive migration all the way down to avoid that oncoming winter. What they do down there is they're essentially trying to, it's sort of a quasi-hibernation. They're still active, their heartbeats are regular. It's not like a ground squirrel that goes under true hibernation, or a brown bear that goes up into some sort of mid-level hibernation where they, shut down feeding and defecation and urination, all that. They're still doing their thing down there. They're just trying to be very, very inactive, conserving their metabolism, and saving their energy for about that 4.5 to 5 months until they make their northward migration again at the end of March each year. So when they're down there, they're quite still in general. They will often appear several layers deep on a single tree branch. Here we're seeing, who knows how many are in this picture. We could be seeing 50, 200, 500. What they do is they actually will hold on to the monarch just below it, or just inside of it to the tree, such that they could be 6 or 7 or even 8 layers deep of monarch butterflies. It's quite amazing. And it makes an incredible scene for folks that are so lucky to see it. When the sun comes out, by mid-morning on a given day, they start to, again, change. You might get up to the colonies and see one thing, one color, one behavior, one pattern, and all of a sudden you have maybe 1 to 200 million monarchs opening their wings before your very eyes, completely changing the complexion of the forest, and this beautiful, brilliant orange shining throughout. They are somewhat active, even though their goal is to be pretty sedentary and to try to not move around too much, to keep those energy stores pretty well and intact for their northward migration. They will move around. The sun moves, they need to stay cool and in the shade. Sometimes a few of them might leave their roosts and go find a little puddle of water or something like that, and then they'll regain their position and try to get a good spot out of the sun to stay within, a good temperature range of 40 degrees Fahrenheit or so in the shade. One thing people are often surprised about is how cool it can actually be up there. People are instantly thinking, oh, southern Mexico, it must be like Cabo San Lucas or Cancun, summer year-round. But we're in the high mountains at about 10,000 feet in central Mexico. You saw that Nevado Toluca. This is not too far away. It's part of that same mountain range. So, yeah, it could very well be in the 30s in the morning and rise to the 60s in the afternoon. But these butterflies are there for a reason. They're trying to stay at this cool temperature to maintain those reserves. They'll also look for some nectar sources. There aren't a ton at this time of year. It's definitely a winterish season, but there are still some brilliant flowers, from goldenrod and ironweed and all sorts of compound flowers. And getting a view like this, like I was saying, even though it's one insect, it's one species of one phenomenon, getting to delve into it in such a deep, profound level is amazing. You can see it in so many different lights, where, if you're a photographer, you're going to be in absolute heaven. And of course, again, what we're certainly crossing our fingers for is when, this huge burst will release from the trees. And recall how I was telling you just a few moments ago that they will actually be in several layers deep. This could be for a whole 500,000 butterflies, all layered 6 or 7 or 8 layers deep. So when that inner layer decides that they want to release and fly away and reposition to find a better spot in the colony or go sip some water in a little puddle nearby, you get this massive burst of butterflies. And it's pretty neat, I have to say. But like I said, ultimately, I think one of the coolest things about this trip is that because you are dealing with one species and one phenomenon, you're delving into it in a very deep level, whether you're a photographer, whether you're a nature enthusiast and you want to learn about the migration or photograph the migration, you get to see things on a very in-depth level and learn some really cool things. For instance, the monarch butterfly pictured here, this is on a fur tree, and what it's doing is it actually its fingers, its insect fingers known as tarsi, are perfectly adapted to wrap around these little tiny fir needles. You may have heard stories or seen things where the human hand is perfectly adapted to wrap around like a banana, and there's evolutionary ideas behind it. Well, it's the same thing with these butterflies, in that they can get the tightest grip because the little segments of their digits in their insect fingers are the exact same size of these fir needles. It's just incredible. The other thing I find absolutely amazing about this trip is that, not this trip, but the phenomenon in general, is that it's a relatively newly discovered thing in the grand scheme of biology and things like that. If you subscribed to National Geographic back in 1976, you might have seen this August issue. It was this phenomenon was just discovered the year before, in 1975, when some researchers sponsored some folks to go tooling around the Mexican countryside and essentially just go old school detective style and show photos of monarch butterflies to local folks and ask if they've ever seen a lot of them and where could they possibly be. I won't go into too much depth as to why that originated, because there's plenty to tell about this on the trip itself, but it all had to do with this tagging program that originated in Canada back in the day. And there were some clues that gave researchers the idea that they probably were migrating somewhere down into the tropics. So as you can imagine, folks cast the net far and wide, and lo and behold, in 1975, the migration was discovered at last. And it was discovered in this sleepy little beautiful high-altitude mountain town of Angungueo. And this is actually going to be the base of operations for our trip. You can see just kind of a one-road town, very charming little Mexican villa style. And today, they celebrate the migration phenomenon because it is it's a source of income for them. It's the closest proper little town to where the 5 public monarch colonies are, and they embrace it. Monarch pictures and graphics on the signs, on the benches, on the cobblestone streets. They have these gorgeous murals all over the buildings. This is a little schoolyard showing the whole life cycle. A little blackback grosbeak, which you'll learn about their significance, bird just on the upper right-hand corner there. There's great culture to the town. It was an ancient silver mining town prior to the advent of ecotourism. It since is not really into silver anymore, but there still is a little bit of mining in the area that supports some local folks as well. But as a result, it has this great history over many, many years, beautiful churches and buildings, and we can visit those as we're in the town. It has this really quintessential sleepy little Mexican mountain villa feel to it that I just love. If you're a photographer, if this is your thing, I mean, just the number of photos you can get with these cool colors and textures and lines and so on and so forth makes it quite a photogenic little place. There are two places we stay that are pretty interchangeable between the Dom Bruno and the Las Margaritas, just next door to each other in the heart of the town. Beautiful little hacienda-style hotels. And again, adding to that wonderful culture we get to experience. Great local food. We can talk with the local owners and hear about their stories of seeing Monarch tourism and visitors throughout several decades and the origins that were not too long ago. In the colony sites, these are visited, but primarily by local Mexican citizens. One thing that I absolutely love is that about 95% of visitation to the Monarch colonies is by local Mexicans. These are school children, these are grandparents, these are families. So when you're down there, the chances are, if you do see people around you, I mean, they're going to be local folks learning about their cultural treasure and their national treasure, their biological treasure here in these biosphere reserves in the Monarchs. So as a result, there's a little bit of infrastructure around the park entrance station. There are little souvenir stands, and I'll tell you, if you're joining the trip, I highly recommend, if you're the kind of person that wants to take home a little memento, these little pine needle baskets are just beautiful. They weave them right on site. They're not imported or anything. The people of the community make them right there, and they're quite well made, very intricate, sustainable, and pretty neat as a little take-home memento. I, as a pretty frequent traveler, love these sort of behind-the-scenes things that we get to see. The little fruit stands, boiling corn in the alley, and things like that. You really feel like a pretty authentic traveler when you're here, because it is just that. This is. Although I like to promote it, and I hope that people do join us, and it gets to be a big thing for conservation, it's still pretty small scale. You can view yourself as someone kind of getting on the ground floor of ecotourism by joining us on one of these trips. The days, we're hiking and we're horseback riding up to the colony sites. At each colony site, there is the ability to get a horse. I highly recommend it at each place if you're okay with that. It takes a lot of the hiking out of the equation, and it's just a wonderful way to see these beautiful Mexican mountains. You can see here, this is kind of what the hiking / horseback riding trail looks like. Beautiful tall oyamel fir trees, hundreds of years old, a nice wide path. It's not a bad place to take a little stroll. And of course, once we're there, it's all about the experience. We're sitting down, we're seeing, we're hearing, we're smelling, we're learning about these incredible butterflies. And obviously, for folks that want to bring their cameras with them, highly recommend it. There's probably no other phenomenon, especially when it comes to one species like this, that is quite so photogenic. I mean, if you want to really wow your friends with showing them photos of something that they can barely understand and comprehend, and it's just amazing what you can capture when you're down there. Big bursts of monarchs coming off the leaves. You just don't see this in normal photography, so it's quite amazing. And we're spending a good amount of time there, and then we're hiking back down. And like I said, it's just incredible how many different scenes there are. Here you have a number of butterflies puddling a small little pool of, it's not even a pond, it's just some wet mud that the butterflies are getting some salts and nutrients from, a little bit of water. Again, most butterflies will actually not descend in these little puddles. About 95% of them will remain in the trees. But again, when you're talking about a total colony size of anywhere from 50 to 300 million, even 5% is quite a significant number. Like I was saying, the trip is quite multidimensional. We are obviously focusing on the Monarchs. That's the highlight. That's the centerpiece of the trip. But we're going to Valle de Bravo, and we're doing some really cool other things as part of the trip on our way back to Mexico City towards the end of the adventure. We're stopping at these cool waterfalls. We're going to Cosmo Vitral Botanical Gardens and seeing these beautiful stained glass windows and wonderful plants and so on and so forth, as adding to the whole cultural well-roundedness of the trip. So getting back to the butterfly story, I think that one of the coolest things is what we're learning about their migration. Throughout the past decade or so, we have found through this tagging program, like I mentioned early, that they have an incredibly complex way of navigating, and it's not fully understood. We're learning things every year, like I said. For instance, the most recent thing we've learned just about a year and a half or maybe 2 years ago now is that most of their navigation organs are located in their antennae. These little tiny filamentous antennae sticking out of their head are responsible for so many processes that go on, from perceiving light to figuring out polarized directions and so on and so forth. There are three main ways that they're navigating down to Mexico. The first is they have what's known as a time-compensated sun compass. So they're actually able to perceive time, perceive seasonality, and perceive the direction of light, and also understand where that sun should be at on the horizon at any given day of the year. I mean, if you're talking about the advanced systems in there, it's pretty astounding. And so what they figured out, the researchers studying these folks, or these butterflies, is that they're able to hone in on a southwesterly direction, again, using light, using that direction of the sun as it's over the horizon, and start basically picking up and heading down southwest. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, their cues are things like host plant deterioration, the milkweed that they eat in North America. As soon as it starts to wither, with excessively hot temperatures and coming on fall, they start to wither a little bit. The daylight shifts as well. Once we're well over that equinox, the summer solstice, we're approaching the equinox, and the daylight is quite a bit less as we get into the fall. These butterflies are perceiving that, and instantly something triggers them to start heading in this southwesterly direction along these compass lines that they can internally perceive. As they get a little bit closer to Mexico, they, in theory, use this metal that's actually found in their bodies known as magnetite. This is still, it's one paper comes out proving that they do use this. One paper comes out that's saying that, well, we're not entirely sure. So it's still a little bit up in the air. But the idea is that they have this magnetic sense in the base of their wings that direct them to these mountains. Now, here's the coolest thing, is that that town of Angungeo I was telling you about, where we stay, ancient or historic silver mining town. Now it's mining heavy metals. There is a very, very sharp magnetic anomaly in these mountains where the monarchs reside. Coincidence? I don't know. We'll let you be the judge of it. We'll talk a lot more about this on the trip and get into some cool discussions. One thing we do know is as we get closer down to the colonies, or as the butterflies get closer down to the colonies on that 3,000-mile journey, is that they perceive smell very, very, very well. This bottom photo of the orange and black, that's a very detailed microscope photo zoomed in on a butterfly wing, and that's that vein making a Y right there. You can see it almost looks like a tile roof. You could have probably thought this was the roof of our hacienda in Angungeo. No, this is actually a butterfly wing. So what it is, it's these overlaid shingles of scales that actually represent the entire, quote-unquote skin of the butterfly. These are little scales that will fall off. So when the butterflies are down there flying in mass numbers, it's pretty routine that these scales will fall off, just like maybe a fish scale will fall off when it's touched against a rock or something like that. When these butterflies beat their wings so fast, these scales will fall off. They'll float down. For us, the visitor, it's absolutely incredible because we're witnessing this phenomenon in this black and gold and orange glitter falling through the air. But needless to say, these scales hold a certain little bit of scent to them that the next generation of monarchs will perceive and direct them exactly to this very same colony spots that their ancestors were last year. It's pretty incredible. They do migrate back north. It's one migration that starts all across eastern North America, makes it all the way down to Mexico. They overwinter. They're in this quasi-hibernation period. Come lengthening daylight and temperatures and so on and so forth, they get the cue to migrate north again. And the same exact butterflies will mate. They'll mate down in Mexico. They'll mate along the way. and they'll make it all the way to the southern extent of the U.S., usually around Texas. They'll lay their eggs, and then the next generation begins. And then the subsequent few generations will make a little leapfrogging thing, making it all the way up to northern U.S., southern Canada, and repopulate the summer with monarchs, the same ones that we see throughout the summer. So again, I don't want to get too much into details on this because it's part of the fun of being down there and seeing the butterflies and learning about this, leapfrogging approach and this long migration south. It's part of the beauty of the trip. So one question that always comes up, and as a conservation biologist myself, I certainly want to touch on it, is what's going on with the monarchs and their conservation? It's a hot topic, rightfully so. I think that as conservationists, we have done our job bringing it in the limelight, if you have indeed heard about it. And I just wanted to touch upon it. So yeah, the monarchs, there is a conservation concern, and it's coming from both angles. One is that there are deforestation concerns down in Mexico. This is something that ecotourism has greatly improved. When you have a number of eyes and ears down there, it enforces and creates stakeholders in the community. People that realize that these local folks making the pine needle baskets or charging entrance into the parks and reserve, they're realizing that money comes with ecotourism, and that if they can keep their national treasure safe and doing well and so on and so forth, it's going to bring money into their local community. Sure, local folks can cut down a tree and make a quick buck, but the proof is in the pudding. These ecotourism destinations, whether it's monarchs or tigers in India or lions in Africa, they're bringing in money to the local communities. So through ecotourism, the illegal logging that's been quite a plague down there for the last several decades has really eased up and improved greatly. So that's a great conservation success, and we owe ecotourism quite a bit for it. The other pressure is coming from North America. And again, I'm not going to go into it too much detail, but there are issues when we're talking about pesticides and habitat loss and so on and so forth. And these are things that you as a person joining the trip will go home and be able to tell the story about and really promote the conservation of these great butterflies. But I will tell you, for the sake of your interest in the trip, people are generally worried that, oh well, we hear butterfly numbers are declining. Yes, that's true. Historic populations 10, 15 years ago were greater, but I can tell you that they are doing quite well in terms of their overall number. There are healthy populations. They certainly need our help. They need our ecotourism. They need awareness and conservation still. But when we're talking about populations in the realm of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million butterflies in each sanctuary, it's still just an absolutely incredible sight. And with further ecotourism, further awareness, further education, I have no doubt that their numbers are going to rebound to their historical maximums as of 10 or 15 years ago. So, keep up the good work, folks. We hope you can join us on the trip, because that's going to be one of the single, best ways to get the word out there. And I think you're going to have a fantastic time as well. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor for questions, and thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope to see you out there on a trip.
Well, Court, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. Lots of inspired listeners, I have to say, and several passionate photographers, so we do have a few questions about that. Before I ask that question, though, just for everybody listening, if you do have questions for Court, you can type those into the question box that's over on the right-hand side of your screen. Remember that you might need to click the orange button with the white arrow to expand the question box for full access. So the photography question. There was a question about whether a tripod is needed and also what camera lenses work best.
Yeah, great question. A tripod is going to be a personal preference. I would say it is not needed, but as with all photography, you're going to technically get a better shot if you use a tripod. You can, increase the depth of field and so on and so forth. But yeah, I don't think a tripod's necessary. There's a fair amount of movement in the colony. Whether it's the swinging boughs of clusters of thousands of monarchs on a tree branch, whether they're bursting in the air, or even if it's a butterfly sitting on a wildflower, there's going to be more movement on part of the insect, so a tripod kind of becomes obsolete. There's a fair amount of lighting there, so you're never worried about being too dark that you have to have a a slow shutter speed or anything like that. As far as lenses, I'd be as versatile as possible. You know, this is a time when you can bring your wide angle and get that shot underneath a tree and try to get those monarchs going all the way up into the heavens. It's going to also be the time that if you have a little zoom lens, you can zoom into a little pocket of the colony far away across a little gorge or maybe even 20, 30 feet from you and get this full frame shot of all the brilliance of orange and black. I think it's a great time to bring a macro lens too. I do a lot of macro photography and throw that in the bag too. So as versatile as possible. I think for the folks that have a 500 millimeter lens and do a lot of bird photography, it could be helpful, but it's not going to be the primary lens. It's not going to be like going on a safari where I say the more zoom the better. I think you kind of top out at maybe having a 70 to 200 or a 100 to 400 in that range.
Okay, and then what about folks that just are, maybe not avid photographers, but they just might bring a normal point-and-shoot camera? Will they still get great photos?
Absolutely. Point-and-shoots are so great for this trip because there aren't a lot of challenges where you would need a big fancy SLR. Even though I myself use one just because I've gotten used to them over the years, you can get great photos with a cell phone camera, with a point and shoot, with anything. I happen to like point and shoots a lot for this trip because every moment things change. You might see a beautiful butterfly on that purple ironweed, or you might see several bursting in the air. And having that versatility to quickly look in a different position or quickly adjust your zoom with just a touch of a button is quite valuable. I know those folks that have SLRs out there have their own reasons for using them, but having a point and shoot is very, very helpful. Definitely get some good shots.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the physical experience on the trip. Is there a lot of hiking and walking on this trip?
As far as Nat Hab trips go, if you're a past traveler, you'll kind of know the style of trip we generally do, and I'll say that it's pretty moderate. We are hiking. It's certainly more than like an African safari, but it's not going to be an all-day trek. I would say it's definitely a physical trip. You want to be in shape for it. You are going to have some hiking at high altitude. We're talking 10,000 feet plus. But like I said, all three hikes that we do, each day a different colony, all of those are going to be horse supported, meaning you can ride a horse for, about 3/4 of the time up to a general meeting area and then hike from there on out. So, you definitely want to be prepared for the trip. You're going to be getting a lot more out of it if you, can hike 1, 2, 3 miles. But there's always the horses there that will certainly take a lot of that huffing and puffing out of it. Anytime you get up to 10,000 feet, you're going to be huffing and puffing, certainly if you're coming from sea level. So one thing that I would recommend if you are coming from low elevation or you think you might be a little susceptible to altitude or just want to spend some more time on the trip is that we have included and offered a new addition for this coming season to visit the pyramids of Teotihuacan. I should have put a photo in here too, but it's a great pyramid site just on the outskirts of Mexico City. It's truly one of the wonders of the world. Every time I go there, I say, gosh, I really need to come down here and just spend 2 weeks at this pyramid site. But we do a great full-day program to see the pyramids. It's got the tallest pyramid in the Americas, beautiful, beautiful grounds, and yeah, it's this ancient lost civilization. So I sort of went on a tangent there, but yeah, I think coming in a day early is going to be the best way to acclimate to the situation. And, getting on, climbing some stairs or walking around the park ahead of the trip is going to get you in better shape too. Okay.
And then on average, how many hours a day are spent hiking? And is it an uphill sort of a thing every day?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first part, you're spending probably about an hour and a half getting to the colonies and then about an hour and a half getting back. The way it works is that you will always be going up to the colonies, so it's an uphill hike. Not every step is necessarily uphill, but you are starting at around 10,000 feet and then usually ending around 10,005 or maybe the upper tens. That being said, the monarchs move around quite often throughout the winter. They can move day to day, week to week. So knowing the exact little roosting spot that the colony is at is pretty variable. Even if we sent a runner up the night before, they could easily move overnight. In fact, on many trips, I've actually witnessed the entire colony moving from one place to the other. And I'll tell you, watching 50 million butterflies traveling all in one direction throughout the forest is enough to, gosh, I don't know, indescribable. I'll put it that way. I can't even bring words to say. So yeah, you know, knowing exactly where they're going to be is difficult, but it's always about an hour and a half to get there. They could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower. You just never know exactly. But like I said, those horses, we really encourage them because the trails can be a little bit dusty at first. So taking them up to that central meeting point, cutting out the first, you know, 45 minutes or hour of the hike, you know, it really takes a burden off the actual physical hiking.
Okay, all right, that's great. Yeah, thank you. There was another question here about when the best time of year would be to go.
Yeah, it's a very narrow season. You know, they arrive usually by the end of November, beginning of December, and we begin our trips for the year in January, just to allow, you know, we don't chance it. We have a whole month buffer. If for some reason there's a slight change in their arrival, we are well away from any fluctuation, and we're in good shape. So we essentially start in January, and our last trip is mid-March. You know, there's not a whole lot of seasonality with it. I'd say that you have a chance of getting a little bit warmer weather as you go later in the season, but it's not always guaranteed. You know, every day can have a little bit of clouds, every day could be full sun. It very rarely rains, but it certainly could. On occasion, some storms go through the area. I would probably say you're better off just working with your own personal schedule and going when it's most convenient for you. It's just phenomenal for the entire 8 or so weeks that we're there.
Oh, it sounds like it. Well, how many people will you travel with on this?
Well, that's a huge point. We never have more than 12 or 14 folks in a group. You know, I think that's essential to all nature travel, especially this trip. You want to be able to interact with your expedition leader, learn in the field, keep a nice, small, intimate group. You have so much more flexibility when you're in a good, intimate group like that. So we really only keep it around a dozen people from trip to trip.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Perfect amount. All right. Well, there was a question here about whether there is any banding going on with studying banded monarchs.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the University of Kansas, there's a great tagging program. In a couple slides back, I showed that little white disc. It had a phone number and an ID tag. It's really a wonderful thing. And a colleague of mine is running that, known Chip Taylor. You can Google Monarch watch, Monarch, and just watch like a wristwatch online, and you can actually order tags yourself. I'm not sure what the costs are, but what'll come is a little tagging kit. It's a decal that's been tested rigorously to make sure it doesn't harm the monarch. It's not heavy. It doesn't weigh them down. They don't perform and fly unnaturally whatsoever. And what happens is you tag them in the summer. Actually now is a perfect time. You tag them in the summer, you release them, and then the idea is that when they reach Mexico, if those tags are recovered or the butterflies are seen, you can actually plot the route of that butterfly going from North America, central U.S. all the way down to Mexico. And if it's seen several times, you can actually figure out, oh, well, it stopped in Texas, and then it was next seen in northern Mexico, and it was next seen here. So yeah, it's a really important thing, and that's actually how this whole phenomenon was really discovered in the first place, is all due to tagging.
Wow. Oh, gosh, this just sounds amazing. So how many days are spent viewing the butterflies?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Oh, on any of the trips, how many days are you actually spending viewing the butterflies?
Yeah, we're doing either 3 or 4 days, depending on the trip. Our photo trips will do 4, and our traditional trips will do 3. And what we aim to do is visit 3 separate sites. There are 5 sites open to the public, generally about 12 sites in total, and so we try to visit the 3 largest, and then on the photo trips, we revisit the one that's essentially the best for that given year early in the morning, so we can get a whole different dimension, when they're very sedentary, nice morning light. So yeah, 3 or 4 days depending on the itinerary.
Okay, perfect. Well, it looks like we've gone through all the questions, so I appreciate your time today, Court. I'm going to turn it back over to you now for any other comments you might like to share before we go.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining the webinar. I hope you learned something. Hope you got energized about the trip. If you are joining us, we look forward to seeing you in the field. If you haven't yet made your mind up, give our office a call. The contact information is below. I do guide a fair amount, but if I'm in the office and the adventure specialist you reach can pass you through to me and get some questions answered, I'm more than happy to do so. But I know a lot of the folks in our office have traveled on this trip, and again, it's one of these. Not just a staff favorite, but a naturalist's favorite. So I highly encourage you to think about joining us on the trip. It's really a life-changing adventure.
So thanks again for joining us, and with that, we'll say good day and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone.